Hello and welcome to Public Forum with me, Natasha Jhabhaskar. India has been offered 7 oil blocks for offshore exploration on the South China Sea by Vietnam, a move that could pit New Delhi's commercial interests against China's territorial interests in the sea. India and Vietnam signed 8 agreements covering education, defense and energy. Prime Minister Manmohan Singh said India would provide a $100 million line of credit to Vietnam for defense purchases. Vietnam has expressed interest in buying defense hardware from India, particularly the Brahmos missiles. Today on Public Forum, we are asking, why did the two sides take so long to broaden bilateral cooperation? And joining me for more on this very esteemed guest with me, former Ambassador Surendra Kumar. Thank you very much, Mr. Kumar, for joining us in this program. Also with me from School of International Studies, JNU, Professor Manmohani Kaul. Thank you very much, Professor Kaul, for joining us in this program. Senior journalist Venkat Narayan. Thank you very much, Mr. Narayan, for joining us here. And Professor and Dean in the Jindal School of International Affairs, Professor Sreeram Chaulia. Thank you very much, Professor Chaulia, for coming here. In the first segment, let's try and understand this visit. Coming back, Professor Chaulia, how are you seeing this visit, and also the fact that the kind of deals we have signed, more than 8 agreements, especially in the exploration sector, a step forward also in the power area where Tata has finally got a big deal?
Yeah, it's an intensification of actually what can be called a very complementary relationship. Mm-hmm. Because if you see, the one pillar that's common between us and Vietnam is Russia. Mm-hmm. And if you see their defense relationship with Russia and ours with Russia, it's not a surprise that Brahmos is one of the big items that's been spoken about. Because historically Vietnam, because of the confrontation with China, has always relied on Soviet Russia and even post-Soviet Russia. So to that extent, the technology sharing and so on is very smooth between Russia and Vietnam. And even though Russia and China have patched up and have a common front against the West on certain issues, it is interesting that Russia continues to beef up Vietnam's military, and that we, together with Russia, are now entering into this agreement to support their air force. And in fact, Russian Navy and submarines have been very critical. They have the Sukhoi base that we have.
The focus area is in fact co-production and maintenance, where we can actually enlarge our area and engagement with Vietnam.
So it's a triangle in a way, Russia, Vietnam, India. And in that sense, they're all complementary and we don't have any conflict of interest. So whatever agreements are coming through are a reflection of this confidence. And to the extent that we have had so-called confrontations on the high sea with Chinese vessels in the past relating to our interests in offshore oil off the coast of Vietnam, it's absolutely essential. We have been emphasizing that we want rule of law to prevail there, not rule of the jungle. And the Chinese have in the past, if you remember, Yang Jiechi was the previous foreign minister, warned the ASEAN nations at a summit, saying China is a big country and you're all small, and that's a fact.
But is the Vietnam of yesterday any different from the Vietnam of today and the way we are engaging with Vietnam?
The big difference, they've also opened up to the United States. If you see Vietnamese policies, they're close to Russia and now increasingly with us, but they're also now engaging with the United States, which is ironic given the historical baggage. But all that is now, water past the bridge. What we are seeing is the United States increasingly also sees Vietnam, despite its human rights problems and the one-party authoritarian rule, as necessary. So what you see is an alignment, and in that sense, we don't have much of a conflict of interest with the US either in Southeast or East Asia. We may have elsewhere on the western side.
Is this also because of the economic challenges which Vietnam is facing in its own country as far as the human development indicators are concerned, and the top-down nature of its economy, the way public institutions are working, state industries are working?
It needs to modernize faster. It needs the same things that we need, which is reforms in certain sectors. They have also been battered up and down in the last 5 years since the economic crisis began. But they are maintaining roughly similar growth rates like ours, 5 or above. And they are a manufacturing powerhouse in certain sectors. And given the geographical contiguity, I mean, there is this talk about the Mekong Corridor and so on. I think it's possible actually for us to even have a land access to Vietnam eventually via Burma, Cambodia, Laos. And I think the moment all these are smoothed out, the trade and all the volumes that we're talking about will really jack up, and they will create a new momentum.
Professor Chaulia, as Mr. Kumar was earlier saying about India's role in Southeast Asia, is this also because the compulsions we are facing from South Asia?
It's a kind of a tit for tat. I mean, see, every major power has problems in its own immediate neighborhood. If you think about it, United States has a very bad, equation right now with most of the Latin American countries. China is having a torrid time with all its neighbors, East Asia and Southeast Asia. And we have similar, issues in our own neighborhood, where there's a loss of leverage and so on. So I guess it's a kind of a strike-out strategy.
And the fear of China encircling India through string of pearls theory.
So we will have to do something similar in their neighborhood to show that, if you are trying to penetrate our zone of influence, that's typically how great powers behave. We can also do vice versa to you. So I think that's one message. I think certainly our stakes in China's neighborhood are probably not as great as they should be in terms of power projection. I think we are there, but with our aircraft carriers and so on, I think eventually commercial as well as military means in these vast littoral basin, we will need to project more to be able to really, in any ways, beef up these smaller states who need support.
But do you see this having an impact on India-China relations? Not to forget, Prime Minister Manmohan Singh was recently in China, and the fact that China has given a very guarded response on the exploration area, and how this is going to have an impact on the South China Sea.
In the past, they've been very sensitive. They've even given us so-called warnings to stay off what they call their own territorial waters.
The zone of influence.
Yeah, but you see that 9-dash line that they have, I mean, nobody accepts it in the world except the Chinese, top leadership. It's just unreasonable. It's against the UN Convention on the Law of the Seas. The Philippines is suing them in a tribunal. They are, it's a very imperial kind of map where they are looking at dominating the entire region, which goes far beyond the exclusive economic zones. So, and we have been clear that, navigation of the oceans and commercial traffic should be free of this kind of bullying. So I think the Chinese may be realizing, I hope so, that the tactic of intimidation has not been working. So hopefully they'll be more reasonable this time, and we won't face so-called warnings again from them. But if we do, I mean, in the past we've been nonchalant about them. That has not deterred us. Those 127 and 128, those two blocks that were given, which the Chinese contested, for offshore drilling. One of them didn't work out for technical reasons. We couldn't find oil.
Right.
So it's not because we have been
and we were
deterred.
asked to wait till the 2014. That was also
so we've not been deterred by the Chinese, and we'll be steadfast.
So are we also saying, no matter how hard we try, we might say the China factor, as Mr. Kumar also mentioned, that deep down China will always exist, even in all the discussions, even in all the analysis. It's not just the China. They might just say that we're just engaging with a particular country, but deep down it's just the China factor, be it US having close ties with Vietnam at this stage and looking for options. They've said that they'll not be supplying weapons because of the human rights record reason. But apart from that, the China factor is very much prevalent.
It's there. I mean, see, they are the manufacturing colossus, export-oriented economy. So, the trade levels with ASEAN countries is huge. Nobody can displace China. There's no question about that. But what they have within ASEAN, if you see, there is you can call it a kind of a fault line between the more pro-Chinese countries and the more neutral or antagonistic countries. If you look at Cambodia and Laos, earlier even Myanmar was part of this group. Cambodia and Laos certainly, even now, adhere more to the Chinese point of view. Within ASEAN, if you see, Cambodia has been having huge tussles with the Philippines. The Philippines wanted a group united opposition, and the Cambodia scuttled it. They worked on for the Chinese behind the scenes. So I think when we also think about this region, I think we need to also do much more with Cambodia and Laos, because that is where the China is really strong, and that's how they can sow division within ASEAN and can reap the benefits. And so we need to be thinking along these lines.
So the look-is policy should not be limited to just a few countries. It should focus on other countries also, like Cambodia and Laos, as you mentioned.
We need to say where we have room to make inroads and to get into that space. That's how great power behavior works.
Okay, but as far as China's engagement with India is concerned, China is engaging with India. We also remember when Li and even Xi Jinping, the new leadership in China, mentioned categorically about continuity in our relations with India, and how they actually give a high priority to but the reality and the transparency in our relations, that has always been a very crucial issue, the trust deficit factor.
Yeah, I mean, see, I think it's too early to judge the new leadership. Some of my co-panelists are more sanguine about it. But we'll have to wait and watch. All these reform initiatives they recently announced at the plenum. In 2003, the previous leadership also announced similar things. But for it to be translated into reality, it wasn't at all a cakewalk. So sometimes we also overestimate Chinese efficiency and the top-down approach and how they can get things done. If you see on the environment issue, if you see on the urbanization issues, if you see even on foreign policy, I think it's not necessarily true that they are super smart or they are always go-getters who win. They do face consistent resistance from various factions within the party and from wider section of society. So on the and also as far as they becoming more mature, I'm not sure. I wrote a recent column on their rather jejune response to the Super Typhoon Haiyan, and the way they were very miserly and didn't even shell out $1 million.
But do you also feel most of their policies at times are India-centric? As far as their white paper on defense is concerned, the defense spending going up. In fact, there was a passage where it was clearly mentioned that it is largely intended for how they want to invest it against India.
I don't think it's India-centric. If you see, their focus is more eastwards, overall, their strategic lens, because they want reunification with Taiwan, and that's nothing to do with us. Tibet is the other big sovereignty issue, where we are, of course, involved in a very intimate way. So I don't think they're that worried about us. See, traditionally, China has never even bothered about India. They've seen us as a kind of like a nuisance or a little pinprick at best. But with the growth rates of last 10 years, I suppose it's been changing a bit. But nonetheless, I think they want to match up to the United States, right? If you see their strategic elites, they don't even mention India as within their league. They often treat them contemptuously. Right. They're looking at parity with the United States. That's where Vietnam or Southeast Asia. I think if we move in, it will be an irritant. But at the end of the day, as Ambassador mentioned, the capacity for any power to stop the Chinese or to roll them back lies with the United States.
Right.
So that is ultimately their measure of peerhood. They don't see us as peers yet.
Okay. So you're saying next 10 to 15 years, that's the timeline Narayan is giving about our problems with China. Your take?
I don't know, it's very unpredictable. And a lot of it depends on domestic China. The way they have propagandized and created this whole hyper-nationalism among their own citizens. Sometimes the state is trying to restrain the public opinion, which is even more jingoistic and hardline. So let's wait and see. As far as Vietnam goes, remember 1979, the last time China did a territorial invasion of a country was against Vietnam. So since then they have been, relatively better behaved. And one could argue that, with all the might that China has, if you see whatever they're doing is probably better than the behavior of, more barbaric behavior of great powers in the past. So to that extent, if they are being civilized, it's good for us. But I think our presence there in that region is one small, addition to a agglomeration of factors that will try to keep the Chinese on the civilized path. Right,
and also the fact that when we talk about our engagement with other countries, we also talk about people-to-people contact. Let's not forget when we talk about China, we say Hindi chini, bhai, bhai. But these things have changed in last few years, especially when transparency issues, the latest Chinese incursion, and the suspicion factor has made inroads.
It's there. I guess university to university level academic exchanges are happening now with the mainland. I think mainland China, because of the language issue, we have not been really able to connect as people, with each other. For example, there is not a large constituency of Indian middle class which sends its children to China, right? We send so many to the United States.
Right.
So there is this innate pro-Western sentiment among our, middle and elite classes that we don't have towards China. So I guess these have to be built over time. But we need to do that with Vietnam as well.
Final comments on the program from you.
The people of Vietnam have long-standing anti-hegemonic history. And we share anti-imperialist ambitions ourselves. So together, I think the political stars are in alignment, and the trade and the goods and capital must also flow. Right.
Thank you very much, Professor Chaulia, Mr. Narayan, Professor Kaul, and Mr. Kumar for joining us in this program. Pleasure having all of you here, and that's all we have for you in this edition of Public Forum. Thank you very much for watching. Namaskar.